This is Justice Done Dirt Cheap. It's May 18, 2012. We're continuing with part 4 of our interview with Evelyn Greene. How are you doing, Evelyn?
Hi, Andre. If people are wondering why I'm wearing the same clothes, it's because we're doing this. And what people are going to say, why she doesn't have any other clothes. I do. But you know what? It's important. I feel good today, and I want to. I just appreciate your time, Andre.
Yes.
And as I said, CBC, CTV, and I will tell you something. We've got a guy here in Fredericton called Jacques Portress.
Yes.
He is the legislative reporter down here, okay?
Yes.
He knows about my story.
Yes.
I've asked him to cover it. He won't.
Yes.
I asked the Irving newspaper, who I feel are involved in this corporate fraud.
Yes.
And I think Irving has government gagged a lot of people.
Yes.
Okay? If you ask a lot of people who owns New Brunswick, you will get a lot of people saying Irving.
Yes.
He is the newspaper mogul here.
Yes.
He decides what gets written and what doesn't. CBC is owned partly by the government, if not totally. I'm not quite sure. But I do know that I've been reaching out to Hubert Lacroix, I believe his name is, and W5. And I got a hold of Mr. Donovan, who's doing all the reporting on the Orange Ontario. But like he said, you've got to contact your down east media and get them interested.
Yes.
Because that's how they got the story out about Orange. It wasn't done overnight.
Yes.
You know, people had wanted accountability. Now, I did call the NDP leader here in New Brunswick, Mr. Carty.
Yes.
To tell him I would be here today.
Yes.
And I wrote Tom Mulcair, our new NDP leader.
Yes.
So we will see how much they are invested in caring about the Maritimes. Because what I will say is this. A little while ago I talked about the unconstitutional self-regulated government of New Brunswick Mental Health Act that needs to be changed and changed soon.
Yes.
It is so unconstitutional, 66, 1, 2, and 3. That is right now before my appeal. Before I've perfected the appeal, it's before the appeal court.
Yes.
I do not make money off of this, okay?
Yes.
I've done this, I've spent hours, and I've spent a lot of money trying to perfect the appeal and so forth.
Yes.
And it will be heard in September. I would like a law firm from New Brunswick to step up and offer to do the rest of it pro bono.
Yes.
Okay? Is that going to happen? I'm not sure. But I do know I have contacted a law firm in Toronto, Swadron and Associates, who are willing to come down here and argue the case on behalf of New Brunswickers at half their cost.
Yes.
Per hour. There's 3 lawyers. And they did the mental health legislation in Ontario. And they're a very good firm. And they were recently on W5 in another matter. And they have worked on a lot of mental health boards and things like that. So their expertise would be invaluable.
Yes.
You just could not. And for them to come down here for 4 days, all they're asking for is a half of their hourly rate plus their expenses.
Yes.
You know? And unless I get a pro bono lawyer, or unless I win the appeal to have state-funded counsel,
yes,
then I don't know if much is going to change. You know, because CBC isn't interested in this public. Like, they should be interested in the fact that our act is unconstitutional.
yes,
They should be advising the public that the rules at the hospital weren't followed.
Yes.
I have given them all this documentation, what's wrong with these people.
Yes.
Why do those people in St. John not know about this?
Yes.
And at the time, I wrote the NB, the New Brunswick doctors, what do you call it, where Dr. Schoenberg is. He's the registrar of the College of Physicians and Surgeons.
Yes.
And he wouldn't take doctor complaints. He said to send them to Donald Peters, the head of Regional Health Authority B,
Yes.
who, as we know, is on the board of Ambulance New Brunswick, and who, as we know, the Paramedic Association asked him to respond under Section 35 and 37 about Dennis Boyce,
Yes.
the paramedic, and he wouldn't respond.
Yes.
So they made a decision without all the facts.
Yes.
Okay? So how do you fight this kind of corruption? How does one fight the police, the corrupt government? There's no accountability, like I said. And what I also wanted to say was, now I'm getting down to the real nuts and bolts.
Yes.
And this is very important. And I want to, I've done a lot of research on this, okay?
Yes.
We have what is known as corporate governance and accountability in Canada.
Yes.
Okay? Then we have what is known in Ontario as the Canadian Chartered Accountants Association.
Yes.
They had a lawyer in, and they did a big article, a report called 20 Questions by this lawyer, and it's all about crown corporations and so forth, and directors, and all of that. I contacted Gigi Daw from the Canadian Chartered Accountants, and I contacted Mr. Blackear from who is our representative in New Brunswick.
Yes.
He said he couldn't help me, and she did give me a couple of leads. And you know that organization that's called the Taxpayers Organization, where they're looking out for where money is badly spent?
I'm unfamiliar with it.
Okay. Anyway, the guy's name is Mr. Leahy in Halifax.
Yes.
And I had reported all of this stuff to our Auditor General, Kim McPherson, and I went to report it to Michael Ferguson a year ago,
Yes.
last Christmas, and he told me that he was stepping down from Auditor General to, I think it was Finance Minister, and then Kim McPherson was coming in, and Kim McPherson said she didn't want to see any of my documents. And when I reported about Ambulance New Brunswick and this Trinidad deal and the whole thing, she said she had no duty to report it.
Yes.
They have what is known as a value for money auditor, and that used to be a Mr. White, okay?
Yes.
Now Mr. White suddenly left last year and is now teaching at Acadia University.
Yes.
Now what would he be teaching these kids about value for money audits? I'm not sure, and maybe whoever watches this will ask the same question, because there was no proper procurement process done when this Ambulance New Brunswick was set up and all these subsidiary companies. No proper bidding. There was obviously no value for money audit, because if there was, they would never have been able to go ahead.
Yes.
And you got this guy down there teaching at Acadia University. What do you think he's teaching the students? And the big guy who owns Medivie Inc. in Nova Scotia, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, his name is George McClellan. He's a an accountant. He was with Royal Bank internationally.
Yes.
And he sits on the board of Dalhousie University.
Yes.
And he's the one that signed one of these documents that I claim is fraudulent.
Yes.
Okay? And I contacted Mr. Irving as well, Jim Irving, and I asked him if either him or his son-in-law, Paul Zed,
Yes.
who works for Barry Spalding in St. John.
Yes.
And Barry Spalding represents the College of Physicians and Surgeons and certain hospitals in New Brunswick.
Yes.
And then you've got Mr. Then I found out that Kenneth Irving, Mr. Irving's son, just shortly after I was beaten up at Ambulance New Brunswick, he quit the company, his father's Irving company.
Yes.
And took off to work for Kinross Gold. And I found that suspicious. So I said to Mr. Irving, did any of you people have anything to do with the fraudulent incorporation of these subsidiary companies that are hooked up with Ambulance New Brunswick?
Yes.
And he wouldn't respond, but he didn't write back to say no.
Yes.
Okay? So here's what I want to say. I already showed you the incorporation documents for Ambulance New Brunswick.
Yes.
If you look on Wikipedia, it will say that Ambulance New Brunswick is a Crown Corporation under Part 3 of the Public Service Labor Relations Act.
Yes.
Okay? And that's true. So I wrote to the minister again many times, but I finally wrote and I said, it's like being a little bit, it's like being a little bit pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. Is this a crown or not? So they wrote and they said it was a crown.
Yes.
So when I went over to Service New Brunswick, they said they don't keep the records for crown corporations.
Yes.
They don't know who does. Okay?
Wow.
I don't know where the crown corporations are registered or where they're kept. Nobody will tell me.
That's amazing.
Yes, and if you read a decision that was reached by our Chief Judge Ernest Drapeau on the Levesque versus BMF farming case, you will see in there that if you do not directly give notice to a Crown company, and this one was something to do with farming or whatever, then you have to give 2 months notice under the Proceeding Against the Crown Act against the Crown Corporation. And you do not give it to the government itself. You've got to go to that Crown company itself.
Yes.
And if you do not do that, if you do not serve that 2 months notice, you have no right to proceed. And this was mentioned in the BMF farming. And in there, Judge Drapeau also says that civil litigation in New Brunswick is not friendly.
Yes.
Like in other places. Okay?
Yes.
So what I read in the paper the other day was that all of a sudden now they're going to introduce a new bill in the legislature to update the old procurement bill, which is what I talked about earlier, the procurement process of bidding and all that stuff.
Yes.
They said it's 40 years old.
Yes.
Okay? And sometime when I'm done with all this, I want to come back to the fact that our clerk here, our court clerk, Craig Carlton, he's under 3 or 4 acts. He's under the Judicator Act, he's under the Court Service Act, he's under the Public Service Labor Relations Act,
Yes.
and another act. So therefore, he can take instructions from the government who appointed him in the first place.
Yes.
And he's really supposed to be there to represent us because he's getting the benefits under the Public Service Labor Relations Act.
Yes.
In Ontario, they have it so that the court clerk there is only under the Public Service Labor Relations Act.
Yes.
And that's why I think some people like you and I are having trouble when we go to the court clerk here.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that another day.
Yes.
But when they're under all these acts and the government can tell them which way to treat certain people, that throws the justice right out the window.
Many masters makes for a confused servant.
And who appoints the provincial judges?
Yes.
You know? And why would we have so many from Cox Farmer? Anyway, getting back to this, here's what I would like to report.
Yes.
I found out that the building and the property over at 24 Harold Daughtery Drive,
Yes.
where I was beaten up
Yes.
by the police, is actually incorporated. It's the deed is in a numbered company, in the name of a numbered company.
Yes.
And it's 641912 NB Inc. And that's it. And this will be on your blog too.
Yes. Okay.
And you would think, it's signed by Charles McAllister on December 17th, 2008. Charles McAllister is the director.
Yes.
And inside it says the incorporator
Yes.
is Mark, M-A-R-C, Gallant, from 2269 Rue A-M-I-R-A-U-L-T, Dieppe, New Brunswick.
Yes.
Now, have you ever heard of Mark Gallant?
I don't recognize the name.
Okay. Then there is 3 directors.
Yes.
Okay. There is Fernand Gallant, F-E-R-N-A-N-D, Gallant, and he's from Rogersville. Mark Gallant is a director as well as an incorporator. Elaine Gallant is also a director. And
Yes.
this was done on the 17th of December 2008. And this is the financial schedule.
Yes.
Okay. Now they have Class A shares without par and Class B shares without par, and it tells you, you know, the dividends are fixed by the board of directors and all that sort of thing.
Yes.
And so anyway, it's basically about the share structure. But what struck me was this: why would our ambulance company
Yes.
and our ambulance everything be owned by private companies?
Yes.
That building over there has got to be worth over at least $2 million.
Yes.
It's got to be. So that is the property, and they own the building. In New Brunswick, they don't have to give the names of the private shareholders under the Business Corporation Act or the Companies Act.
Yes.
Okay? So one would wonder why they would incorporate Ambulance New Brunswick under the under another act besides the Crown Act.
Yes.
But then they can become subsidiaries to these private companies.
Yes.
And then, you know, it goes on and on where God only knows who is getting what, right?
Yes.
So then there was a letter generated to Service New Brunswick, and then on June the 13th, 2007,
Yes.
Service New Brunswick is writing Medivie EMS in Moncton
Yes.
to George McClellan. Now he is the man who I mentioned is the person who started, who's the head of Medivie Inc., which is the parent company of all this stuff. The
Yes.
Medivie group of companies, including Medivie Blue Cross.
Yes.
And they have plans for federal people like the RCMP and the certain of the military, okay? Now this is a letter to Mr. McClellan at Medivie EMS Inc. saying through his lawyer, Lawrence Storty,
Yes.
who is from Stuart McKelvey. Now this is back in 2007. At that time, T.J. Burke was the Attorney General. T.J. Burke is the one who got over $250,000 for representing Stafford.
Yes.
Okay? At that time, Michael Murphy was the Minister of Health.
Yes.
Michael Murphy is now working with Cox and Farmer Law Firm. And he was put under the gun last year for that EI scandal. And getting back to the name I dropped just a while ago, Fernand Gallant, one of the directors of Ambulance New Brunswick over here,
Yes.
from Rogersville. He told me his lawyer is Roland LeBlanc, the head of sewage in Moncton, who was audited late last year for excessive spending
Yes.
by the Auditor General. So it just goes on. And in any event, this document was CC'd to Brian Charles, Minister's Office,
Yes.
and it was sent by fax. It says SNB President, and then a fax number.
Yes.
Service New Brunswick, 15th of June, 2007.
Yes.
Okay. Now what they wanted was to register the name of a company using New Brunswick.
Yes.
In it, okay? And they said, this is further to your request of June the 7th, 2007 through your lawyer, Lawrence Storty, for the use of word New Brunswick and MB as the first words in the following corporate and business names under the Business Corporation Act and Partnership and Business Names Registration Act.
Yes.
So they named New Brunswick EMS, MBEMS, New Brunswick, and there's 5 of them.
Yes.
And then at the bottom of it, they said, the following approval is conditional in anticipation of New Brunswick EMS, Inc. entering into the above referred agreement by July the 9th, 2007. If such an agreement is not entered into by July the 9th, the approval may be revoked.
Yes.
Okay? Okay, and I already showed you the documentation for New Brunswick EMS, Inc.
Yes.
And I'm going to show it to you again. Okay. Here's what it says too. This is to confirm my approval. Okay, and I'm going to tell you whose approval gave this.
Yes.
You won't believe it. Subject to paragraphs 5, 6, and 7 here too.
Yes.
And anyway, what they're saying is that over in Stanley, New Brunswick, it says, it is my understanding that another subsidiary of Medivie EMS Inc. called EMS New Brunswick Inc. currently is one of the ambulance operators in New Brunswick.
Yes.
In the territory known as Stanley Nashwauk. It says here, now listen to this very carefully. In order to avoid any confusion in the public domain, listen to this.
Yes.
My consent is also subject to Medivy EMS causing New Brunswick EMS Inc. to change its name to EMS New Brunswick Operations Inc. or something similar within 30 days of the execution of the ambulance agreement between New Brunswick EMS and Ambulance New Brunswick.
Yes.
Okay? And then it's signed by...
Greg Byrne.
No.
No?
Well, it's signed by
for.
Jack Keir.
For Greg Byrne.
For Greg Byrne.
Wow.
Okay. And then it says, Medivy EMS, on behalf of itself and a company to be incorporated known as New Brunswick EMS Inc., agree to the above conditions.
Yes.
And guess who signs it? George McClellan.
Yes.
President and CEO of Medivy EMS Inc. And he is also signing again for New Brunswick EMS Inc.
For both. Yes.
And in New Brunswick EMS Inc. financial provisions, it says all directors, all shareholders, and their associates, who
Yes.
could be friends, are entitled to loan guarantees from any other subsidiary.
Yes.
That would mean the Ambulance New Brunswick.
Yes.
And that would mean government money,
Yes.
tax, you know, they're given, Ambulance New Brunswick, by being a crown, is given so much government money.
Yes.
Plus they're given so much, they get donations and they get breaks here and there and stuff like that.
Yes.
Anyway, getting back to this, I went to Service New Brunswick and I asked the manager, Susan Baker, I said, who is Jack Keir?
Yes.
And she said she didn't know. And I said, but you worked here for years, you would have to know who Jack Keir is.
Yes.
She said, no, I don't. So I looked it up. Jack Keir used to be, in 2007, he was a minister. I believe it was energy or something like that, but don't quote me on that.
Yes.
Okay? I just know he was a minister in the government.
Yes.
And I called Mr. Jack Keir and I said, Mr. Keir, I find this incorporation suspicious. And I said, why would you sign for Minister Greg Byrne, who then was the Minister of Service New Brunswick?
Yes.
He said, I didn't know what I was signing.
Wow.
I said, what do you mean you didn't know what you were signing? He said, I'm a St. John boy. He said, I'm no lawyer.
Yes.
He said, somebody put something in front of me and I signed it. And what got me was he just seemed to blurt it out like it was something he was waiting for someone to ask him for years. Right?
Yes.
And so I said, well, why did Mr. Byrne have you sign for it? And he said, Mr. Byrne was out of the country.
Yes.
I said, what part of out of the country was he?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know. And so what I want to say, how the connection goes around and evolves here in Fredericton is this. Greg Byrne grew up in the Harvey, McAdam, St. Stephen area that Chief Provincial Judge Jackson grew up in. They're both lawyers.
Yes.
And that's why I think, with all my reporting about what has gone on, that's why I'm being treated the way I am. I feel somebody called Ambulance New Brunswick that day and set it up that I would be stopped before I uncovered all of this.
Yes.
Okay? That is my total belief. Now, having said that, like the New Brunswick EMS went ahead and they never changed it like they promised they would.
Yes.
You know, like they said, this is conditional upon you changing.
they undertook to do something and
Yeah.
they did not.
Okay. And what is weird and about all of this is I have a business card here, and it's got SMU New Brunswick EMS.
Yes.
Okay. I guess that was the name that they were kind of considering that they should put it in,
Yes.
but never got around to. Okay. But they're using it, and it's not registered over here at the corporate office.
Yes. Wow.
And they had agreed to take that New Brunswick EMS and change it to a different name.
Yes.